In this episode of the Encounter Report, 4 people are riding momentum to sublimation. There's Axelrod, your humble narrator who played the game on normal difficulty on the PlayStation 4. Joining him is Ghost VTS, our difficulty diplomat who played the game on easy difficulty on PC, Caslo25 the Dog Whisperer, who played the game on normal difficulty on the Switch, and Landale, who played the game on normal difficulty on the PlayStation 4. Each one of us played the game blind, and believe me when I say, we know exactly where we're going. First up on the assembly line are battle types, and we get a glimpse on some interesting numbers. Ghost BTS and myself are fairly close in total encounters, but Caslo25 has a fairly drastic reduction. Even his encounter time has a significant decrease to the rest of us, which certainly warrants some fun questions. Landale's high random encounter count also sticks out, especially considering his time spent in encounters is about 8 minutes higher than myself. In addition to that are the boss numbers. I notably struggled quite a bit on them judging by my times, but Ghost VTS and Caslo25's times are relatively close despite Caslo25 having 10 less boss encounters. Landale also rivals my time once again, but having a good chunk more encounters as well. Another notable stat is the encounter percentage. Despite each of us having a very different approach and angle towards the game, 74% of the grand total of encounters were random encounters for everyone but Landale, which is very fascinating. Lost Sphear takes an approach of having encounters visible in the dungeons with the ability to avoid them, and while you could probably come to a minimum encounter amount for the game, it sure is neat to see most of us get the same percentage. For battle locations, there's a traditional world map that doesn't have any random encounters, so I elected to log all the non-town outdoor areas as dungeons in this case. With this breakdown, we can see a better distribution of any time-consuming places, and in this case, town encounters played a very small role. Adding to that, our encounter percentage does deviate slightly, but is effectively the same in this case as well. In the combat types department, we get a brief look at another distribution set. Something I haven't quite touched on much yet is Ghost BTS on easy mode, and combat types offers a nice angle to do so. Once again, his encounters are fairly close to mine, but his times are drastically reduced. Easy mode not only reduces the overall difficulty of encounters, but also provides additional experience and money earned from battles. This allowed him to move ahead in levels slightly, but most notably, allow the upgrades of weapons and armors to be more frequent. Next up is subtypes. Notably, very little grinding was necessary for this game, but Caslo25 opted to do some this time around in 2 instances off-screen. The first was mostly for additional money, where he accrued approximately 5 levels, and the second was to gain a better advantage against a boss, where he also accrued about 5 levels again. Meanwhile, for Landale, we get a good idea why his encounter numbers are drastically higher than everyone else, and it's because he did a lot of grinding. He caught on pretty quickly to platinum bombs and set up a solid spot to earn several levels, and later more money. Lost Sphear also approaches advantage encounters in a slightly different way. There's threat encounters where you start off with a disadvantage, side encounters where you start off with a minor advantage, and preemptive where you start off with a major advantage. The distribution between them amongst Ghost BTS and myself is actually fairly close, which comes as a surprise for me because Ghost BTS, Caslo25, and Landale built the Foresight artifact, which forces preemptive encounters on everything but bosses and select story encounters. As a side note, there are 2 story encounters in Wat Palace that do not have a threat, side, or preemptive designation in case there were some savvy number crunchers out there. We have notable locations up next, and we definitely have to start with Dakavenu. While there were a few encounters sprinkled throughout the game prior to this with annoying mechanics, this is where it starts to ramp up. Enemies exploding on death, countering after being hit, recovering large chunks of hit points, and having high evasion. And speaking of high evasion, the third Zemrod fight really caused some problems for Caslo25 and myself. Even Ghost VTS spent some time on the fight, having accrued 4 character deaths while Landale came out relatively unscathed. Caslo25 and myself suffered though. I spent over 9 minutes on my first attempt trying to claw my way out of dire straits, which ultimately failed, while Caslo25 just couldn't keep up with the damage output. After 1 attempt, Caslo25 decided he would grind to overcome the challenge, but the rematch against Zemrod still proved to be just as tough. With 2 attempts each though, we both overcame the challenge. Now, I've teased Caslo25's numbers having something else attributed to them, and the big secret is he stopped playing after the fake credits. I wasn't able to discern if he knew there was more game or not, but I would imagine if he knew, he would have continued. To explain, after defeating Crom and Doc Avenu, we're eventually kicked to credits, and while they are still scrolling, it fades to white and asks you to save. After saving, you're sent back to the title screen. If you continue your save, there's another 8 or so hours of game, but for me, I randomly stumbled upon it effectively by accident. Caslo25 not doing so is a fantastic bit of insight to what I consider a very curious decision by the developers, and I thought it was cool that I managed to find someone who didn't continue the story. For the next location, we move on to the Sprite Night Orb, which is the final dungeon of the game. This dungeon is filled with obnoxiousness galore, and it felt like Ghost VTS didn't experience the same pain that I did, until he decided to fight the optional bosses. In particular, Morive delivered one of his coveted deaths, which forced Ghost VTS to approach the rest of the dungeon with extreme caution. Upon reaching Dark Ruin, Ghost VTS had very little trouble with the boss and eliminated his arch nemesis in 6 minutes 50 seconds. For Landale, he utilized the scan feature from the vocal suits, allowing him to kill enemies lower level than him instantly and still get the benefits as if he fought the encounter. Even with that to his advantage, Morive still packed a punch, handing him 2 deaths. In fact, Landale was extremely successful in this dungeon due to his party being higher level and having very strong equipment from the grinding. None of the optional bosses survived his onslaught, and by the time Dark Ruin came about, it was over in 6 minutes 33 seconds. For myself, it was all aboard the struggle bus. Between several obnoxious abilities and high damage output, I was doing my best to gain the upper hand. Unfortunately, I managed to die in my first attempt after 17 minutes against Dark Ruin. My second attempt, while being victorious after 26 minutes, proved just as challenging. Party composition is going to cycle by, and I imagine this might be one of the few times where we mostly have the same party setup. Everyone but Landale kept Kanata and Lumina in the party to the very end, while I had Galdra and Van round out the party due to Obaro's speed becoming a hindrance. Ghost VTS had Locke and Van, while Caslo25 had Galdra and Van to round out his party, but he also had Shera as a substitute on multiple occasions. Landale had a different approach, opting to use Kanata, Dianto, Locke, and Galdra for his final team. We've also got to look at level progression as a new graph. On the left, we have the levels, and on the bottom, many of the bosses in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle in the graph, and within those rectangles, we have Kanata's levels for each participant. Lastly, the red shows the level of the boss. I made this inclusion because while I have been tracking final levels where applicable, I thought it would be fascinating to see how each person's playstyle could be displayed. Lost Sphear was a great game for this, as character levels were visible after every battle, and there were plenty of shenanigans with grinding. For my levels, they made jumps first for the Demon Gate fight, where I spent a good amount of time exploring ship sink before I was supposed to. Those levels kept me ahead of the pack, but the lead shortens where I'm caught at Zemroad 2 and then surpassed on Gears 1. Ghost VTS's trajectory was surprisingly not as significant as I would have expected with the easy difficulty experience boost. While he maintains a tie or a lead with me from Gears 1's boss fight and afterwards, it's a small one of a couple of levels at most. Caslo25's progression has a few jumps in it where we can see the fruits of his off-screen grinding. By Zemroad 3, he's effectively caught up to Landale, who was leaving everyone in the dust. If he had continued past the fake credits, it's entirely possible he would have kept up pace with everyone, as levels started to converge after the Crom fight was over. For Landale, he spent much of his time not having any real leads for the first several bosses, but once he found the Platinum Bob and saw Garther, it was grinding, and more grinding from there. From Zemroad 2 onwards, Landale maintains his lead thanks to some calculated grinding sessions and the power of scanning enemies. To close it all out, here's the final combined stats. This was a great look at how easy difficulty can play a solid difference in time spent in encounters, but perhaps the reduction in encounters isn't as impactful. I will also add that everyone played on the semi-active battle style. I was on active until a death on the Alpseed boss fight, where I determined active would be next to impossible for me. And that's what we got for the Lost Sphear Encounter Report. I hope you visit everyone's channels and social media to praise them for all this wonderful data. With another report done, I'm willing to bet that the Lost and Found basket is going straight to the moon. Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you on the next video.